All right.
Good to go.
Welcome, everybody. To those of you who are here in person with us in Sites 209, and for those of you who are joining us via Zoom today. My name is Bradley Lamb. I'm the director of the Office of Sustainability here at Westchester University, and I'm very happy to welcome you to this, the 11th presentation in our Spring 2025 Sustainability Research and Practice Seminar. Our office for 8 years now has been sponsoring this series of presentations with our colleagues from the Office for Research and Sponsored Programs and the Sustainability Council's Scholarly and Creative Activities Committee. We're very happy to work with all of them, and we're feeling a little bittersweet as this semester winds down, but we do have one more presentation after today's with Professor Karen Volkwa. So please join us again next Wednesday at this time to round out the semester. But for now, I'm happy to pass the podium to our speakers today. Please join me in welcoming.
Thank you all very much for organizing and pulling this amazing series together, and it's a pleasure for us to be here today. I also want to introduce my co-presenter, Gavin Myers, who has been a wonderful asset to me all semester long, actually for years now, but in the capacity by the Center for Civic Engagement and Social Impact. We have the opportunity, those who do service learning and civic engagement work, to ask for a student as an assistant to help out in creating things happen. And Gavin is the person that has been doing that for me this semester with our Global Studies 110 class. And that's just a kind of the shell of which we are presenting today. The Global Studies is a minor, in case folks don't know, and I just want to make a pitch for it. There's a lot of ways that students can fulfill many gen eds and also get a Global Studies minor with this course as an intro, which Gavin was in a few years back when we had masks on. All of us had masks on. And then it has a capstone research opportunity at the end. So if anybody's interested in Global Studies, we can talk more about that later. Sustainability got tied into Global Studies through my work. A couple of years back, I did the workshop in January with other faculty, which was marvelous. And since been kind of integrating increasingly different parts of sustainability. As a social scientist in political science, my work is more related to the broad definitions of sustainable development, and that's why we have the sustainability development goals up on our first slide, because this is really, I've been tying it increasingly into students exploring all of these different goals. So that's part of the frame.
Yes, yourself. My name is Gavin Myers. I'm a senior here at Westchester. I studied political science, concentrating in international relations. My minor is also in Russian studies. But yeah, how I got us started with this was, well, I knew Dr. Stevenson freshman year in Global Studies 110. But then over the summer, we went to travel to Germany together for a study abroad experience. And that's how we really got this ball rolling and working together and stuff like that. And she's my advisor, so we've known each other for ages. We've had a lot of conversations about that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
I just want to say also that Gavin was able, since he wasn't able to travel to Russia during this last few years, you know, our programming for study abroad has been a little spotty in Russian-speaking regions. When we were in Germany last summer, it was amazing. We were able to partner with an organization that hosts international young adults who are fleeing from different spaces of conflict to Germany for safe haven. And we had a number of people from Ukraine and from Georgia, also Afghanistan, who were in the program with us for 3 of our 12 days. It was amazing. And Gavin got to work on his Russian by and large while being over there and being a wonderful part of that program. So it was really cool. So just want to start out with context and also to engage you all and all of you on Zoom as well. If you want to write in the chat or take your mics, put your mics on for a little bit. We're kind of, you know, as social scientists, we always have to start out thinking about the context. And April 2025 is a really interesting new kind of context for many of us. In our world, global studies, globalization is a piece of our puzzle that we talk about a lot in many different ways. A lot of questions right now in our field about, are we in a new post-globalization era? And if we are, what do we call it? And I invite you all to throw out some adjectives or some fun or some, dark humor if you prefer. I don't know. It's a really interesting moment, but any thoughts? What would you call it? We have some names we'll share with you, but well, just want to throw it out to you all first. And Zoomers, how do we see you?
Protectionist, Cheryl Manco.
Yes, that definitely would be one I would include. Thank you, Cheryl.
You're asking for questions about what era it is or what you should call.
Oh, what would you call it?
Studies.
Yeah. What are you seeing in all the citations that we request from you?
Oh, did I actually look at them?
Right, no,
Intentionally isolationist.
okay. Isolationist, that's a very powerful word and definitely one that's
Or unevenly isolationist.
uneven, okay? What's the uneven part?
I think in Europe, we see more cooperation and sense of shared destiny.
Okay.
Um,
Can everybody?
In part, I think so, in part in reaction to the new administration in this country.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that's a great point because I'm struggling to think of something that is constant across the world because it's so different depending on geographically where you are because the US is so protectionist, but then there are other countries where there is so much cooperation that they want to be collaborative and then there's the US.
What about
Right.
multipolar?
Yeah.
Multipolar, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really important way to think about it. That's a little more kind of neutral, right, in terms of, it's much more descriptive than, kind of
Yeah.
isolationist has all kinds of baggage around it, right? Maybe you don't want to think about, but it's definitely, I think, a trend of our government. And another thing to think about, which we talk about all the time in global studies is, so we could say a country does this, which is international relations speak, right, if we will, because we all know actually the government is doing that, but that's the key piece, right? And that's why I encourage y'all to join poli sci, but because the governments are the pieces of the puzzle that, shift, that change, that maybe stay longer than some people want in that country, thinking of authoritarian regimes in the world. And that can be very complicated in terms of creating those kinds of policies that are not reaching out. So, yeah, so if you want, so we can continue on, if you want to, yeah. So, popular protectionism is one, some call it populist, meaning having this appeal to a mass base that can get you elected, in different kinds of democracies, right?
Oligarchic overreach is also another one, given our US context and the increasingly use of people with a lot of money in our country.
Do they have to alliterate?
So far, we're following Grassley. So a term as a political scientist with all different kinds of political persuasion sitting in my classrooms, I've come to use the term deconstruction as an attempt at a more mild framing of what's going on. And the hard part of that is when or how will reconstruction happen, if it will. And that's, I'm missing on the alliteration, but it's definitely related. The difficult part is that our experience over the last 100-something years in the US is that reconstruction hasn't always worked very well. So that encourages students to take a look at history, a more critical perspective, and think about, so what if you do want something to be deconstructed of the system that exists now, what would you like to be reconstructed? So it helps us just to begin to think forward as we are here.
Of course, age of uncertainties. There's a lot of uncertainties in our politics. You never know what this administration will bring them the next day, and who they'll feel upset overseas or China or anyone like that. So it's definitely a big one here.
Yeah, and with the current conflicts that we have to at least mention, the headline I heard this morning and the news was, oh, well, if you don't hurry up and decide what you're gonna do, we're gonna back out for Russia and Ukraine. Okay, so, you know, again, a flip, into a different way of thinking about what's possible. And then, for thinking in a more kind of, pessimist to optimist way of thinking, sustainable development, I think, is here and here to stay. Testing it is what I see as going on at this point, but I think it's got deep roots. I think a lot of people support it, whether or not they can name it. And that's part of what led me to kind of want to integrate this into this global studies class with students who are majors from all different backgrounds. I have a lot of management, finance, students, and then communications, across the board, lots of people, because it's an interdisciplinary class. So we're gonna talk a little bit more about that. This is one from, yeah, if you remember, some of you grew up with this, right? The bill on Capitol Hill. But yeah, so there we go. So interdisciplinary speak, if you will. This course we have come to create having various themes. The first is planet Earth, right? And we talk a lot about environmental questions. That's more our geographical approaches to thinking about what's going on in the world and how people are learning about it. We don't torture students with geography lessons, although it's really tempting. You know, the whole map quizzes thing. I leave that to my colleagues and other ambiances.
Next, technology, of course. And we're kind of in this new age of talking about AI and how that's used. But in the text, it really kind of interdisciplinary in a way, crossed over kind of those borders in technology and how it's affecting business, politics, every aspect of our lives. And are we getting more globalized because of that? And so yeah, that's kind of what our text that we use throughout the semester really challenged.
Another unit in the chapters in the text that we refer to is about identities, and then the identities in different places around the globe, in ourselves, and then outlooks as to how do we get along, how do we work together, when is there conflict, what are those tensions, what are those lines. Those are more social and cultural borders between us, so to speak. That's a part of the language of global studies and the way that we're working on it at current times.
Yeah. That was a picture of the whole blue origin thing that they sent the celebrities up into space and whatnot. So that's kind of what we're trying to combine there with that picture with the technology and with people and identities and whatnot. And kind of thinking about yesterday, did we have to send these women up to space? Like, what was that all about? Did we have to? Did we have to do that? So kind of crossing some words there. But next is cooperation, a big one. And how are we tackling the issues of our world working together? Are we not working together? And that's kind of something we discussed throughout the semester too.
So, and also then, of course, the whole set of controversies around DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion with the current administration and, you know, from school boards all the way up through, you know, the federal levels and the kinds of issues that are coming there and challenging people, especially in university levels as well. Prosperity, you know, we had some interesting conversations with our students this semester. This is all online, so via chats and discussion boards about tariffs. And the beginning of the Trump administration's discussions and impositions of tariffs and all of the changes that have happened since. And then how does this reverberate for us right here in Pennsylvania? And this was one of the images that came up when we, you know, were Googling and looking around for those kinds of questions. And the piece of the car industry puzzle that could affect Pennsylvania is the rods of cars that are manufactured in the western part of the state. Still kind of a holdover from our steel industry and the pieces of that have, you know, are ongoing. But as you can see from that map, even if you can't see all the details, there's all globalization causes a lot of different parts of a commodity chain to be in different places. And that can be seen at first glance, as something that doesn't make sense. Like, why do we ship rods to the next spot in Canada to be polished, and then down to Mexico to be assembled, and then back to here to be, marketed? So, those are important questions. But as we know, if you don't dig deeper into the why or the budgets or whatever part of that isn't evident from the headlines, there's a lot more going on than we understand. So, a lot to explain there. That a lot of my business and finance students kind of, that pulls them in, because some of that we actually have a supply chain, minor, major now, that is important, so.
And the next one, security, of course. And discussing the ongoing struggles in regions throughout the world and wars, and how that's affecting the world and how we're pulled into it as in the United States and how other countries are cooperating, and also discussing the use of technology, now using drones to more easily even wage war on each other.
So that brings us to this moment in time in this semester when I had realized that this was a really unique opportunity for me to have 100 students working all at the same time online in this, as you just understood, the structures of global studies, to take a look at things and to really dig into the sustainability development goals. So we decided to create a database. Gavin has been great in helping me set this up and think it through as a student in the same line as many who are taking it. And so we assigned students one country, or they chose one. And then we also have worked through and attached the sustainability goals to the different chapters of the themes that we just outlined to you. So they then have been able to do research, identifying the institutions, key actors, factors that are causing progress and regress, in those countries, at these different levels of analysis that we use a lot in international relations. So those are some of the outcomes that they've been able to do, are, famous or infamous student learning outcomes on the way that we set up the courses. And then some of this also coming from the sustainability, student learning student learning outcomes and political science. So the last piece is, of course, the students take with them, and some of them, this is the part they don't expect, and I love that some of them grasp onto this, is reflecting on SDG comparisons and considering the different levels and jobs and places, countries where they might want to go study. Like Gavin going to Germany and getting in a little Russian, right? Or internships, either locally, Harrisburg, Washington, here, graduate programs, and then hopefully careers. So in that way, it exposes them to a lot of different potential for their own futures. I just want to show you really quickly, for those who are not familiar with the SDGs, which we don't assume that you all are. This site is the United Nations based set of work. For those less familiar, it comes out of in the beginning of the 2000s, with the new millennium starting. There were millennium goals initially. There were 8 of them that were set up to be measured and looked at and attempted to be addressed in all the countries of the UN for the first 15 years of this century. And then this developed to the next level after 2015 of these 17 goals. And so this site is marvelous. It's showing you some of what they are. A lot of the students, what I'm thinking about for some of the research that I want to ask you all about later, if you know things or have input for ideas of what we can use with the database that we created. But a lot of them focused in on certain the goals. Poverty and hunger were very important and easy for them to connect with an action, a local action, which was part of the projects that we set them up to do. And so some of them worked in food banks. Some of them worked here in SESI with our own Westchester Food Bank. Others worked on SDG number 4, which we'll talk about in more detail in a minute, about education, and so on. So this is what they are.
That supposed to come up on the screen,
Which,
the individual.
Yes, it's
oh gosh, sorry. Yes, it is. I have to get out of
I
there.
have to reshare.
Reshare, right. Sorry, thanks, Walt.
Sure.
Now I have to reshare back to that, probably.
We'll see.
Okay.
Now we can see it.
You can see it. All right, I'm sorry.
We're all good.
There we go. So the 17 goals, right? And the UN site. Got it. If you click on these, they each have, you know, very nicely put together information about them. If anybody wants some thoughts about how to, you know, pull this into a class or relate some of what you're doing, like the health, you know, piece is great. Or gender equality, water, sustainability, cities for our geography department, and some great stuff going on with urban studies. And then these ones are more peace, justice, and strong institutions. We have a peace and conflict liner as well that students might definitely use these pieces of this puzzle. There's all kinds of case studies. If you click on more information, it is marvelous what you have access to. And then partnerships. I love that our Sustainability Council and the office have worked so hard at creating those, right? And they're just evident from yesterday's summit and all the different kinds of people who are working across these ways to make this reality here at Westchester too. So now I'm going to stop sharing this, go back to the other piece. This one.
And then what we kind of challenge our students to do is apply the levels of international relations and how they can apply it in their given country at the end and see where does say, well, I focused on kind of Belarus this kind of way, I focusing on them jokingly kind of, but how do they interact with international groups? What do they do specifically in their country to achieve these goals? Yeah, and what movements are going on, what protests are going on that is hopefully shaping some policy and progress of the given country.
And the only thing I would add is just at the bottom, individuals, part of the approach is also for students to educate ourselves and then realize our own agency in the process of taking an action that's related to an SDG and then, and in Czechia or in Belarus or in Chile where I do my own research, you know, there's these kinds of leaders and sometimes they're similar, sometimes they're different. The amazing part about our world today is being able to share across in an instant, you know, so much headlines and highlights of different ways that people are taking action. In a place like Belarus, it might be in social protest, and they may not really be able to say a whole lot right now unless they are ready to be arrested or worse. And so just realizing what that might mean. And then for some people, you know, in our own current time or previously in our own communities and in the United States, when is it time for a person to decide to protest themselves, right? So that's, you know, there's lots of examples out there.
Did you have one student focused on Belarus or was that kind of?
That was mine.
Okay.
Yeah, I've been doing the US and I pull in examples all the time, because I really want them to get out of our own usual box, knowing that, of course, we all bring that, right? So for all our US students in their classes, but that's how I manage that. Yeah, it's a good question. Thanks. So this is what they use, one of the rubrics, and then you saw some of the ways in which they fill that in. And so we created this database. Should I get that in again? Sure. Yeah, sure. Then I have to pause to share. It's one other piece of the puzzle that's worth taking a look at. First, you have to click here.
So
This one.
I mean, Zoom's working on their share
And then
function. Easier.
and then get out of the previous one.
Yeah. Let's see. Stop share and then reshare. Okay,
Okay.
was it there? No. Thank you.
No.
All right, so we created this rather unwieldy database. That's our, to first try, and again, for those who manage data, we'd love your feedback. But this is how, for now, the students all have a country. Those are here in the columns that you can see their names and the country that they chose or were assigned. They break down by regions, and we redefine regions depending on how many students there are in the class. So, you know, this year there was the opportunity to break it down a little bit more broadly. So Africa, Asia, we also have a Middle East and Northern African MENA area. We named Eurasia, which we can debate these until the cows come home in terms of the names and places, but these are the different countries that people signed up for and that we're working on. The fun part is sometimes that there's an exchange between the students within regions or across regions, and they banter about that in their own discussions and conversations in the discussion chats. Yeah.
Do you give the students a list of
The
areas and countries that they can sign up, or can they come up with anything?
We give them a list.
Yeah.
I mean, essentially we list all the countries in
And
the
they
world.
can, everybody has to sign up for a different one.
Yeah. And if they haven't signed up by the end of week 1, I put them in somewhere. So, yeah. Not everybody tunes in right away. But then the fun part, or the data collection part, has been this. And so we have the different SDGs, you see abbreviated here, and they put in the data. There's many different measures for each sustainable development goal. And so we choose a few. For example, when we did the second chapter in the early on in the semester, we take a look at carbon footprints, right? And emissions and how people can make a change. And we asked students to either sign a petition or try to sign up for, or to share in the chat, the discussions, a way that they're gonna try to be more aware of their own reducing their carbon footprint during the semester. Yeah,
And they have to put it in this rubric, or do you put it in?
they put it in.
Or they,
Yeah, we share it with everybody. It's just a Google.
do they get points for that?
Yeah, pretty simple.
Good way of doing it.
And then they have to discuss it and analyze it, right? And so these are, for example, quality education, participation in pre-primary organized learning, right? So just to give you an example of my own research, in Chile, one of the interesting pieces of the puzzle that I found, where they had a socialist female president doctor for the first time, she's a medical doctor. That's when they really invested in preschool education in Chile, because she knew and, you know, had done all the research, et cetera, had her experts confirm this is a really important piece of this puzzle that we're not addressing adequately yet. And Chile is a highly privatized set of systems. So how are you going to provide for that when people might, you know, young couples are starting out? Is a similar problem we have in the US, right? With, you know, paying for preschool and it costs more than public school, and you're starting with your entry level jobs, right? So the struggles, and so interesting conversations that come out of it. Just to give an example.
So they write about the current state of that.
Right, and they're using, as you can see, the data that
Okay.
is in here. And they can compare it to other countries and like, hey, how come they're doing so well? You know, and ask each other questions
Yeah,
that leads into deeper research.
right.
Yeah.
So about the carbon
Mhm.
footprints. So like for the US, I don't know what it's like for other countries. I've always wondered this. For the US, I know we don't count carbon footprint of like armed forces, which is a lot.
Wow. And we're already off the charts, right? Like, in terms of- we all know that.
Do other countries do that? Is that?
That is a really great question that we would have to pass on
Yeah,
to,
man.
Okay.
to a deeper discussion. Yeah, I love that. That's great. Yeah, but what we found that some students responded was like, okay, so I'm gonna walk to class this semester, you know, or I'm gonna carpool to get my groceries, or simple things, right? But it does just create a little bit of awareness, and maybe they do it, maybe they're just bluffing, but I don't know, you know, like it's just, again, it's creating awareness, trying to realize there's little things that we can do that matter.
Yeah, I do something similar, but I do it from the health perspective, you know, talk about exercise. And they realize that they park a little further, they're getting a little exercise.
Right.
And you don't have to sign up anywhere for a program. It costs nothing, you know, to come up with the stairs instead of the elevator.
Right.
And just creating that awareness. And that will make, if you think about it, if everybody does think about that, it will make a big difference. But everybody just does a little step.
Absolutely.
Tells their friends.
And then you don't, you also, if you think about you, unless for handicapped, of course, but you could have parking further away and you don't have, it makes things simpler. Or public transportation would be more accepted that way. And then it starts just with getting a
Yes.
little idea implanted.
Absolutely. And so, for example, since I'm in political science, one of the fun ones that I had one point was with a student who, let's see, she was kind of maybe independent in her political perspective, and so was always asking a lot of good questions. But when it came up that the US fared so poorly in gender equality related to this measure of seats held by women in the national parliament, and then in our own state of Pennsylvania, we're way down in terms of the percentages of females in our government. We've never had a female governor, and she was appalled. She had never really put all that together before, and so she signed up for a summer. I'm gonna learn how to, campaign workshop for a week. And she's now currently working for a state senator, and she's on her way. I will campaign for her, and she's running for governor. So anyway, but things like that just are planting seeds, So this is just a little bit more about what we have. It's a lot of stuff. We weren't particularly systematic about choosing the measures, right? There's a lot of different options that you can pull in. I'd love to have in my in-person classes, class discussion around which measures should we use and why, right? But online it would have been a little cumbersome. But so far that's kind of what we're thinking. So what do we do with this is another juicy question that, we're kind of still thinking about. And then maybe, the 400 level class can use it or something, because the 100 level class created it. And that might also create some community across our minor, which is, we haven't done a whole lot with. So, yeah. Any questions you have about it right now? I'll stop sharing. And wrap this up. And then we'll just have some more conversation.
When did you start this program?
This is the first time this semester.
Oh,
Yeah.
You've done a lot in one semester.
Well, I've been using the class the class is not new, but this set of opportunities is new, right, to offer that, so. I think we spoke about this already, so really, one of the fun pieces of this, since I've done a lot of work with community engagement, or I do that with my Latinx politics course, that's an upper level political science class, and we do a lot of field trips and engagement with the Latino communities and have a conference in September. So I've been doing this for years, but trying to figure out how to do this in smaller increments, because the things that I ask of students for those are like 30 hours in a semester. And these are just little projects, right? So it can be online. Some students did projects of taking a course about human rights that Amnesty International offers, and they get a certificate, and then they put that on their poster. And it just helps them kind of broaden a perspective that they already were interested in. There's also tons of things on climate change that people could also sign up for, different themes that we've been talking about in sustainability. So they will do that, and then this is what the data looks like. I'm sorry that, of course, that's tiny, but just to give you a sense of wow, that's how many measures there are per development goal. And this is just again the country that I happen to know a lot about. And some of the things that are interesting or that were surprising to me, and I actually have done some writing and research about in relation to the political pieces of the puzzle in Chile, are that Chile qualifies as an OECD country, but it has the worst inequalities of any of them, right, in terms of that group of countries. And in South America, it's second only to Brazil in terms of economic inequalities. And so part of my puzzle has been, what's going on with that? It's got a long history, but trying to understand that, and then what are the policies that current governments are trying to work on to remedy that, and where do they get support, et cetera. So for me, like these help me out.
It qualifies as what?
An organization of economic health
Cooperation and development.
cooperation and development, OECD. And it's essentially the more developed countries of the world. Like US and Europe are generally the ones.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that question. That's good. And then,
And then I fooled around with Belarus, of course. And I was very surprised, there's a lot of green on this board. They're doing a lot of progress, and they're only 30 in the world in regards to sustainable development goals. And I'm still struggling with the question of why, and because their government is very centralized. So of course their kind of peace, justice, and institutions are doing very poorly. They're basically a copy and paste of Russia and their government styles. So, but they do very well in education and in poverty. They and I wonder, like, is the government just single-handedly just able to do that because of how centralized their government is and able to provide those things to achieve these goals and make that progress. So very, very interesting stuff.
yeah, I mean, it raises really important questions for all of us about, and that's where we're all learning, right? About what kind of government or how long, when is better for sustainable development. And in some cases, this is where, you know, centralized government looks like it has some benefits. So, you know, saying that in a US classroom is blasphemous, but we deal with it.
But I know lots of people who grew up either in Russia or in, you know, the former Soviet Union
Yes.
countries, and I met them here in this country. And most of them say, after living in this country where they have all the options and so much freedom, that they like the centralized government, the way it was, and when they grew up and lived there much better. But they came for the economic opportunities. But you know, you think about it. I mean, I came from Germany to here, that's kind of something a little bit in between, right? You know? So it is, even to me, still easier to go to a small grocery store and have an option between 5 cereal boxes. And I prefer that rather than going to one. It takes an hour to even find where it is. And then you have 50 options and you don't know what to choose. It's
Right.
waste of time, it stresses me out. So, you know, if you would only have, quote unquote, the healthy food available, you go in, small store, and you're out. So if somebody could just say, you know, that's what we sell, and we will not do X, Y, Z, and forget about all this stuff that's bad for you
Right.
and bad for the environment. But you know, in this country, everybody has their opinions and they have to be heard, and you can't do that. But in regards to the individual, what's easier for your lifestyle, it's just easier. In many ways, it's easier than
Yeah.
having so many options.
This
It
is
makes
an
life
interesting point.
also more complicated.
Mhm.
So I think that's why they're coming from that. And then, like in Europe, you know, you can only build, you have these little villages and you cannot build outside of them. So therefore, you have all the greenery around. What we have here, you know, yesterday I was appalled. When I came to this area, it was in 92, I lived in Westchester, and if I drove all the way to King of Prussia, 202.
Yeah.
I wouldn't see a house or high rise or nothing. You know, now you see all of this. And then yesterday, in the middle of it, Chesterbrook or
Uh-huh.
Devon, wherever that was, and I left it, and the countryside is not to be seen anymore. So ugly, and then this and that strip mall and the stupid high rise. You know, it's not. I'm telling you, there is something to be said for centralized and keeping the country green and beautiful.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
Well, I grew up around here. I was away for a number of years and I came back. And when I grew up, I do not remember flooding being such like a terrible problem. Every time there was like 3 days of rain, you know, like, okay, if it was a week, sure. But it's amazing, and some of it is that planning or the lack of, coordinated planning of so many, different sites and apartment buildings, and where's the waste going, and so I agree, yeah, there's a lot to be thinking
And
about.
the site, I have lived in this country since '84, so that's a long time. I go back to Germany, to the little town where I grew up, and even the bigger town around. There are few changes. Here, you have big changes every
Right.
year.
Yeah, suburban
It's-
Philly is
It's,
amazing, yeah, I mean, and then the whole real estate issues that we have related to that for our students too, so. So we just want to share, to wrap up, some highlights from the posters that the students put together. We didn't have them write papers, although that's a thought about it for next time, is maybe short papers that would lead into this, so they could do deeper research earlier on in the semester and not try to cram it all in at the end. And so this one is one that a student did on Chile, and one of the couple pieces that I found really fun were the pieces of again, how they are doing well with renewable energy, that I know nothing about in terms of like I crossed the discipline, I crossed the border, if you will, to find out more about what's going on with energy there. Air pollution, when I go visit Chile, I stay in the capital of Santiago, which is one of the most terribly polluted cities in the world, in Latin America for sure. But what are they doing about that? Right? And so some of it's geographic, like it's in a valley surrounded by enormous mountains, so it's really difficult to manage it, especially when there's now I think 8 million people in that valley. It's about a fifth of the entire Chilean population, so it's tricky. But I learn new things. Genesis Castillo is a student from the Dominican Republic. And she's, in addition to being Dominican and a Westchester student, she's a mom, and she's also got a farm in her home space in Dominican. And so that led her into thinking about what's going on in the country next door of Haiti, related to sustainability and what she's calling urban cleanliness, which is under the sustainability for cities goal. And then she this summer is going to be going back to continue work on a contaminated lagoon or like pond area near her farm back in Dominican. And she said, I didn't think I was going to be the person who would stand up to do this, Dr. Stevenson, but who else is going to do it? So it really has motivated her, and she's going to do an independent study about it as she wraps up her undergraduate studies. So yeah.
It looks like she picked up trash.
Yeah, she picked up trash.
It's kind of like the global connect.
Let's just finish this and then we'll open up for questions. It's like, we have about 3 minutes, so.
And then the student focused on Senegal and zero hunger. They took their action was with Safe Harbor in Westchester, and they helped prepare food and whatnot for individuals in need. And yeah, it was very interesting in how well Senegal is doing, or where's the challenges there.
Robbie Ciccinelli also did work on the SUG of related to education. And he chose to include that he decided for his community engagement project, he was going to go to the hands-off protest in April. And that he's been listening and concerned about the negative effects of what the Trump administration's work is going to have on education, on the Department of Education. So that's some interesting pieces, and I encourage him for being courageous to go and to share that. And then his focus was on Honduras, which also he uncovered some really important progress that they're making at the primary level, and then talked about what they still need to work on in terms of moving on from there into encouraging and building more schools and staffing them at the secondary level. Yeah.
And then next, the student focused on Indonesia, and he was very heavily involved in our campus kind of organization in SAC, and a partnership with Make-A-Wish, and focusing on the sustainable development goal of good health and well-being. And he said that he participated in fundraising to help this organization in achieving that goal here in the United States. And then he applied that to kind of Indonesia, and seeing where the challenges lie there, and how where at the international level and on the level some of the international conditions come into play. And And then our good friend Mandy, she went to Germany with us this past summer too. She's a very personal connection to her sustainable development goal action. Her father was diagnosed with colorectal cancer a couple years ago, and she does a lot of fundraising through his winery. Has a lot of fundraising, and she's like second in line to this winery. She's always working there back at home in the Scranton area, and I'm from the Scranton area, so it was so funny finding out in Germany that we were from the same area. But she did hers on good health and well-being as well, and how kind of her connection, and she focused on Germany, of course, here, and seeing how they do this issue as well.
And she's going back. She's gonna, Germany, this was her first foray last year abroad. She's one of our students who joined others in getting her passport for the first time. And, you know, her dad stayed up all night until she got, you know, to the place that she was going to because he was so worried. And she has just embraced it and had a marvelous time. Was lovely at connecting with all these different students. So we tell you lots of different troubled places. And so much, she's a social work major that she wanted to go back and work with that office, and, you know, take it another step. And I would not be surprised if she ends up studying over there, all goes well. But in the meantime, she's managing all this on her home front. And so she shared from her heart, you know, in this project that just really moved us all, thinking about, wow, these things really can make a difference. So we are gonna wrap this up, but if anyone wants to stay and talk, I'm happy to talk more about ideas for how to make this into teacher scholar work. If people want to write about it, or if we want to think about collaborating across different classes, love to do that. And then service is also part of course, what this has worked with, and through my work with community engagement and so many of our students who've done great things, be happy to do that. Oh, and I'm building on the colossal work of our other sustainability faculty who've been doing this way longer than I have. Paul Morgan and Cheryl Wanko, you all are inspirations to me. And Liza, we were talking yesterday about what we want to do next fall. And so there's lots of things we might continue to do. And this is just our last photo of the group last year in Germany. We're working together there. So that's it.
Linda.
Linda.
Thank you for that shout out, because the main question I want to ask is, how angry will you two be when I use this model in my WRT 200 class? Because it's just, yeah, it's fantastic. So.
No, let's talk. Absolutely. We were also, Cheryl, admiring your campus level work that the students did this semester, and thinking with out loud with Paul yesterday about where should we take these posters, because there's so much information, and the students did just really great research in working that. Or should I be looking at you? I don't know what the camera is. So yeah, so I look forward to more conversations.
And we are, sorry, we're just a little after 12:50, and we usually pause right now to let anyone online or here in person who have to get on another class excuse themselves. But Linda and Gavin have both said they have a few more minutes if we have some more questions. All right. Thank you.
Well, yeah, when you were talking about cleanliness, you know, it doesn't really matter where you live in this country. You could live in the most expensive area, you could live in the poor area, the garbage and the litter everywhere. And I just, you know, people go to Germany, and how can that be possible?
I know that people take care of their blocks.
No,
It's amazing.
It's, you know, we do not teach our children. It's not necessarily the schools, you know, the children see what the parents are doing. And if the parents wouldn't be telling them, and it would be from top down,
Yeah.
if you litter, you have to pay a huge fine. I mean, in Germany, if you don't clean up and use your brush and your broom every week on your sidewalk, and when you have snow, you have to do all that, otherwise you have to pay huge fines.
Right.
So nobody even dares to throw anything out. And it's just amazing how it's so bad, and I walk around, believe it or not, with, and I go for walks all the time. Most of the time I have a little plastic bags and I put it all in there. And each time I go in an expensive neighborhood with a bag full of trash,
Right.
it's terrible.
It is a terrible thing.
You know, I just do not understand that, do they live like, excuse me, like pigs in their own homes? Does nobody clean?
Right.
It's terrible.
Right.
That's
So all this individualism, you know, if we're talking individualism, your responsibility is to take care of yourself also, and that includes what you do to your body, and, you know, whatever you do, that affects your body too. So even if you just focus on yourself, that should be one of the number one things you should do.
Yeah, I like that, yeah.
Good.
Yeah, that's part of kind of my role here. I even took an action myself, and encouraged the students to join me in Kennett Square. We did a little cleanup, on the side of the road with, the red clay lines there, in Kennett Square, and I didn't expect so much. I had 3 bags of trash full of, alcohol bottles, cigarette cases, things like that. And I was super surprised for that.
Yeah, I feel like the biggest issue is that like we have this idea that we're separate from the environment. And so respecting ourselves doesn't necessarily mean to a lot of people in their heads respecting the environment, like by putting their litter in the trash, you know, the recycling bin that's 10 feet away.
Yes, affecting them, it is affecting them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good.
Thank you. Chat class.
Yeah. Sure.
Oh, yeah.
Did any of the students struggle with finding service initiatives to engage in?
Yep, a lot of them asked. We set up a lot of things, and Gavin did a really nice job on behalf of the SESI appointment to offer to go out with them to do a cleanup or to figure out how to take the course on the online option. Some students, like I had one, the most recent email that I'm trying to figure out what to do with is, well, I read the whole thing the day before, and I realized that there was more to it than I was gonna be able to do in 24 hours. I'm like, okay, so, so that, you know, I'll have to figure out something with him that will. Yeah.
Nice.
All right. For example, but that's. So, but the wonderful thing is that right now in April, there's a ton of options. You know, there's like a cleanup every other day, you know, in different places that aren't too far away. What would be nice if it were in person is that students, I think, could rally together a little bit more, and reach out to each other to get there. You know, like sometimes cars are an issue or, you know, this kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah, so that would be nice to be able to coordinate better. Working on the campus garden is also an option.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
So, you know, being able to cross the street from Anderson where my office is to go there, is really easy. And Casey's been thrilled to have more people come and volunteer now. Yeah, maybe I'll offer it. I don't know how I'm gonna do my 5-week summer session with this, but we'll see.
Just to clarify, what's the name of the course? I know it.
Well, Introduction to Global Studies,
Oh, okay.
110, GST 110.
And is it offered every semester?
It's offered all the time, yes. Yeah.
Is it online?
It's online in the spring and it's in person in the fall. That's how I'm doing it right now. And then I offer it a winter online and a summer online.
Is it synchronous or asynchronous?
Asynchronous. Well, it's kind of semi-synchronous actually, because the students have to talk to each other, so they depend on each other to write stuff. And then it's kind of week by week, but I don't have Zoom sessions, yeah. Only as needed. Yeah.
And you mentioned that you collaborated with SESI. How involved were they in the design of the course and the suggestion of service learning
They
opportunities?
gave us a list, they trained Gavin. So every community engagement scholar goes through a training with them, it's like a Saturday kind of thing. And then they report back, about, you know, I'm getting enough hours or this is how things are working out with this particular stuff. Gavin received some emails from students asking questions that they, that they'd rather talk about with him, so that was really nice. And then that was it, really. It was pretty minimal right now. I'd like to get this course to be approved for the civic engagement pathway, which is another, just a curriculum development, curriculum capacity process I need to do, but, I wasn't sure about the timing of, the projects. Because what I've done before has been a lot more hours, but this would be fine. So, I think that'll be another way to offer it in another way that students can get some credit for doing this work.
So is it also a gen ed course?
Yeah, it's an interdisciplinary course. So like, I think, I don't know if I mentioned it, but I think one of the learnings for me as a professor has been, sometimes the first day you're sitting in an interdisciplinary gen ed class and students are kind of like, okay, what's this gonna be about, right? And, the nice thing is that I think by using some different things and, having to do a lot of different stuff that, I would say most of them are really engaged by the end and admit that they actually learned something. I read the book, but it doesn't matter, so it's been fun. Yeah.
So I know you talked about like possible things you could do with this.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
The piece that I was thinking about was they no longer offer the sustainability 400 course, or at least they weren't like this coming semester.
Okay.
Because they didn't have enough people.
Are you a minor? Is that
Yes.
a thing? Okay.
So the option that they're now offering is that you do an internship for sustainability.
Oh,
And I think that's a great option. I'm all for it.
okay.
But I also think it would be cool, maybe offering like this as a starting point, or just like, obviously we would spend a lot of people, but
Yeah, some more synergy between the minors.
yeah, just like this is a starting point for like an independent research project.
Yes, that's what I'm thinking too.
It's very thoughtful.
Yeah. Yeah, and once you dig into the data, you're like, what? Like, why is Belarus green? I love that he brought up that question, and I don't know what Russia's scores are, but is the data even really what is going on? That's a whole other question that we can dig into and start looking at different sources and find different things. So it's it's a puzzle. It's a set of puzzles that, it pushes students into a new space, without having to go abroad. It's kind of cool.
Are you going abroad again this summer?
I just went on spring break to Mexico with our historian, Latin American historian Tia, who recruited me to come there to offer a course that was focused on Indigenous history in Mexico. And we collaborated with another friend and colleague, anthropologist at Kutztown. So she recruited 5 students. It's not easy to recruit, students in Kutztown to go abroad. So it was great that she was able to go with us because 5 is not usually enough to go on our own. We had 12, which was a lot for recruiting in Westchester. It's not always that successful. So that was great. So we did a spring break 9-day trip, Indigenous questions. Oh, and I reminded you, we flew from Guatemala that a Guatemalan friend of mine gave me, who's in Mexico, just thinking about sustainability from Indigenous perspectives. So what's that?
So what
Another-
states,
One
what
other
states
world.
did you go to in Mexico?
Morelos, Mexico City. We were in Mexico City for 3 days. We stayed at, this was really interesting, at a nuns, the Benedictine nuns have a center mostly for retired nuns, and they offer space. So we stayed with them and we had meals with them, and one of the students kind of were able to land, and realize, oh, it's women, we started talking to them and trying to spread out our translators and whoever had a little bit of Spanish. They have amazing stories to tell, so unfortunately it was day 3 before that started going on, but that was cool. And then we worked with Augsburg University in Cuernavaca, who provide the space and all the, liability and services and translation and vehicles and stuff like that. So you don't have to speak Spanish. I would love to do a faculty thing, a faculty and staff thing at some point. We used to do these like 10 years ago. Remember, we would go to Costa Rica, different places, and it was amazing. But we'll see. We'll work our way back to that.
Have to speak Spanish.
That'd be cool. Nawa, yeah.
Yeah.
We did we were invited to a Nawa village where there's a Canadian woman who's married to the now leader of the community, who was he's now grown into that, I mean, his age. And he invited us to a very gentle indigenous ceremony that some students were a little worried about. And initially, like, is this sacrilegious if I do this and I'm Catholic, or whatever their different religious perspective was? And so they decided whether to participate or not. But it was a pretty simple, an hour. Sometimes those go on all day. So yeah, it was really cool. Really, it was a good thing. But yeah, so that's my study abroad plans, and maybe I'll take students back to next year, not sure. Where are you going? Are you going anywhere lately?
I have an invitation to give a presentation. Germany again, in Bochum, which is around the corner from Cologne. And then they have this international Council of Sport and Physical Education coming again. I've been on the board with them for many years. They want to bring me again. And I said, okay, I'll come to your meeting, and that's great. So, yeah, I used to be very involved internationally, but with all this COVID, things can change so much.
Yeah.
I had wonderful invitations to give the keynote speech in India, to give a keynote speech in Tokyo, and gave them all online. And so at the top of your career, when you can do things like that, when people have recognized you and they invite you, and then have to do everything online, it was just so sad. I mean, it was so sad. Yeah, I'm saying that, yeah. But I like to get more involved in it again. And I'm getting all these invitations. Why don't you retire? We'll give you this much money for your sick days, blah, 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 because I can retire now. But I'm actually thinking I wanna go again. I'm not at that phase. I'm not, my colleagues, and I have several of them, COVID was just their way of experiencing, it's a good thing to fade out.
Mm.
But with me, it was aggravating.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm just a little bit, doing something a little bit for that.
Okay,
I would make mine do
okay.
this.
Where do you want to go, Walt?
Am I going?
Where do you want to go, or where do you go?
Oh, well, I'm planning on going to Ravenna, Venice.
Wow.
My wife is a mosaic artist, and she's gonna do a mosaic workshop. Part of mosaic world, yeah.